Hey everyone, my name's Xavi. Just a quick look around the room. Who is like a student, intern, right now here? Working 1 to 3 years experience, working 3 to 5 years experience, 5 years and beyond. Any founders? Okay, now you guys know like who to talk. I'm going to be talking about. I'm not going to be demoing any code, but I work at the infrastructure layer, so this is going to be an interesting talk. I mainly work in AI infrastructure. I've been working on Hostari for the past 5 years now, all bootstrapped. I'm a sole founder, so I recently made the move to becoming a full-time founder like a couple of months ago. So very, very proud of this, and kind of like my first kind of let's do it. Over the next 10 minutes, I'm going to show you guys like where to buy parts for the things that you're going to deploy in the data center. So we're going to go over workload-based planning, smart purchasing decisions, and lessons I learned. Data center ops, I'm mainly going to be covering physical space, power network, and then remote hands. And then my demo is going to be all the secret information that you only get on calls with account executives at data centers. This is information that you don't find online on the internet. These are not information that you find on a pricing page, but this is all the information I've gathered over the past like couple of months. I'm happy to share this with all of you guys. Okay, so mainly what I do is I buy parts. So I import parts from like Alibaba, and I buy parts. I assemble them, I put them up into data centers, and then basically what I do is I want to build out like a PaaS platform where people can run their open source models. And this is where like a lot of these AI like platforms, they kind of abstract all of the pricing. So, but I think what you could do, right, is you could even just buy your own like RTX 3090s, 4090s, like on Facebook Marketplace, basically, and just like deploy it out into the data center. What I've noticed from doing this entire thing, I'm going to show a picture on the next slide, is there are so many considerations. You need to think about stuff like CPU, RAM, where am I going to buy my SSDs, hard drives, do I need a high availability network? Cases are expensive, GPUs are expensive. Like you look at Supermicro and you could buy stuff from Supermicro or you could buy stuff from QJ Systems, but they're so expensive, they're gonna add margin on top. But then, you know, as a hosting company, especially something that's like self-funded and kind of funded through customers, you kind of have to think of like other strategies that don't require like a massive CapEx to do. What I found was that, well, you know, stuff like Alibaba is still very, very viable. You see this play a lot in like e-commerce. What we were able to do is we were able to achieve like 50% lower CapEx versus like enterprise hardware providers out here. So like if you were to buy like a 128 gigabyte RAM machine with something like 32 cores and 48 threads with like 2 terabyte SSD, something around that from an enterprise provider would cost about $2,400. We were able to hit $900. So, you know, when you get that CapEx, you could be able to tweak stuff like pricing. So as a company, you could be able to sell like, you know, better compute and like compute at better prices, stuff like that. So, but at the end of the day though, I still think it's way easier to just raise from Drive Capital or raise from like another VC and then just buy the hardware and just not have to worry. But I know, I find ops fun, so this is kind of mainly what I do. Okay, this is the rack that I assembled myself. So this is a 42U rack. You have 5 shelves. It starts from shelf 0 at the very bottom, which you can't see, that has 5 desktops. Shelf 1, which is 1 shelf above, that is actually running Metal Llama 3 on 4 GPUs. You have another one that is also running Metal Llama 3. And then you have 5 desktops on shelf 3 and shelf 4, which are running S3 storage. But what's interesting about this is that usually you see a lot of these like rack-based, like 1Us, 2Us, 3Us, 4Us, where you kind of like, you slot it in, it's actually very easy to rack these. But I decided to use desktops because of just portability and the pricing. You see a lot of like cases out there, like these enterprise hardware is so expensive. I saw like this case that was like $500. I was like, why am I gonna buy like hardware that costs $500 when I could just import something from Alibaba for like $40 and just like screw everything in? Works, I guess. What I mentioned on the top right there is flexibility versus specificity. So you could build a machine that's like super powerful, right? But then you could run models, you could run and train models on it, but at the same time, the pricing and like the amortization of all of that, what you spent to deploy that hardware could affect like what your pricing for training the models looks like. So what I did was I thought to myself, I said, okay, what if we try just running models but not training models? Could we adjust the pricing that way and kind of sell it to customers that way? And I also thought of stuff like, oh, do I need a strong CPU for running stuff? Like, do I really need a Threadripper, or could I just go with like a Pentium and just like plug in like a bunch of GPUs? So a lot of these CapEx considerations are kind of like put into play here. But yeah, very, very proud of this rack. I do have some videos, but let's go on to the next slide. Okay, data center ops. So when you consider like deploying stuff in a data center, you have to think of 4 things: physical space, power network, and labor. Physical space. Space is very, very abundant in different geos across the United States. Like if you were to deploy something out in Texas, it could be cheaper because it's so much land, so abundant. If you were to deploy something in the New York area, there's also like price considerations there. Power network. This was another thing that I was thinking about because we mainly host like game servers. So we had to think about stuff like, okay, if each computer runs 500 watts, we run 25 computers, how much kilowatt hours would we need to purchase from the data center? So these kind of considerations need to be made when you're like purchasing power from a data center. So I did stuff like rated PSU wattage times number of machines, very simple. What I would rather do actually is do average kilowatt usage times the number of machines. So what you could do is you could probably run like, you're training a model on like full load, you measure how much wattage you're using, and then you could talk to the data center and say, hey, I actually only need 5 kilowatts of power. So you can do stuff like that. Labor is also something I learned is very, 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 very expensive. I also have a newfound respect for a lot of these blue-collar workers that kind of work in the data center. There are people that need to rack and people that need to cable and stuff like that. And these people, you could spend up to like $150 to $250 per hour, like just to get somebody to like put a server and rack it. I got an invoice last month where I was telling someone to press a power button, and I got charged $65 for somebody pressing a power button. I'm like, what? Okay. And just kind of turned some gears in my head. I was like, okay, what if we have something like slow remote hands? Like, what if you just get a freelance data center tech and just to go in and like have like a contract written out, and it could be 3x cheaper for any data center ops that you're doing. Yeah. Yeah, these are also like kind of like case considerations I was kind of thinking about. I think this one, me rolling in this is me from this morning. I was literally just rolling in like a 10x GPU cluster into the data center. These things are like heavy, man. Like they're like 80 pounds. But I was thinking of stuff like, okay, what if we could just do like open air casing? But then when you look at all the open air cases, they're just not designed to work in data centers. So I was like, okay, I might as well like just like slice the metal and just make sure it like racks in the data center properly. But you know, you kind of have to be scrappy when deploying these things out. You kind of see this in like other hosting companies as well. There's this company called Evergreen Compute. It's kind of doing this with 4090s. But they figured out supply chain. I think that they were able to figure out where to source these PNY 4090s. And they actually sell a GPU cluster like this for like something like $21,000. and they manage it inside the data center. But it's a job of a founder to kind of figure out like the kind of ICP resiliency and stuff like that. Documentation is also super important. I think that, so these are rack layouts. So for example, in a 48U rack, you have different servers. So you could think of this almost kind of like an AWS. You have these like AWS diagrams where you have like, oh, like this VM belongs here, this VM belongs here. When you self-host stuff, you're mainly designing stuff like this. I think documentation is just important. And it's also kind of a simple strategy to just say like, hey, like, if you want to move off a big cloud and run your models cheaper, this is one way you can run it. So I think once you get down to this level, you could kind of tinker around with like AI model pricing and stuff like that. Cool. DHH's Basecamp, they pay $130 to $150 an hour for one-time remote hands. My rate is like $250. So I'm like, okay, so how am I going to negotiate for with the data center, essentially? But yeah, those are all my slides. I do have a quick demo that I do want to go over, or things to kind of take a look at. Let's see here. I wanted to actually just show like actual numbers. When I was negotiating with account executives, they kind of got me on like, oh, you need a high availability switch. I'm like, why do I need a high availability switch? I'm just running game servers for people. Like, if the game server goes down, like, does it need to be like super 100% uptime? So I think when you know, like, so I said to my account executive, like, hey, like, let's just use one switch. And I think I was able to like reduce the cost down by like $400. But again, you have stuff like power, PDUs, bandwidth is also important. IPs that you're going to be using, support. So they got me on that one, but I was able to kind of like negotiate against that. What else was I going to show? Yeah. You could co-locate using. You could rent just like half a cabinet or a quarter cabinet. It's just that you need to be escorted into the data center if you need to do any changes. What else did I find out? I think I have a quote here. Cool. So this is the actual quote. So you have stuff like, you negotiate for stuff like kilowatt usage of power over X number of months. Typically, the contract is like 2 to 3 years, actually. So if you have big requirements for like a lot of compute, it makes sense to buy them wholesale from like a reseller like Deft, which is the same reseller that Basecamp uses. But these are actual numbers. These are actual numbers that Hostari is paying. Yeah, so IP blocks. Managed switches, co-location setup fees. What else? This is an actual invoice. So I think we just have north of 4 terabytes of RAM over like 25 or like 30 like physical cores, and we pay something like $3,300 a month. So it's a lot of compute, but one of the things that they do charge here is stuff like, let's see if we manage to just, so you have recurring charges and you have non-recurring charges. We had a project actually where we wanted to move something like 4 terabytes of data into the data center, and you have to be careful because they will charge you for any overages. Similar to how like these cloud companies also charge for overages, but then you see the number at the end of the month. So I was like, oh, okay, it costed this much to transfer like X number of terabytes of data. So knowing the numbers is very, very useful because at the end of the day, you could change the pricing of your models or change the pricing of whatever you're trying to sell. But yeah, this is just a quick insight as to like what it's like at the infrastructure layer. But yeah, I'm open to any questions.